Hello, here is your second helping of Newscast for Friday the 16th of January. Earlier in the feed, we plonked down Laura's exclusive interview with Robert Jenrick, the defector from the Conservatives to Reform. Now you will hear some analysis of what that interview means and also just what on earth is going on in British politics on this episode of Newscast. Hello, it's Adam in the Newscast studio.
And it's Laura in the Westminster studio.
And it's Joe Pike in New Broadcasting House.
Laura, I'm out of practice of you being in a cupboard at Westminster and not in the room with me. But
I know. Me too. It feels like very retro, but quite fun all the same. Yes.
So we played the interview you did with Robert Jenrick earlier in the Newscast feed. So if people want to listen to the whole thing, it is there.
Yep.
Give me your kind of big initial thoughts kind of after you walked out the room.
One, he's absolutely deadly serious about what he's done. Which, if you've followed Robert Jenrick for years, that's not surprising. He's a very, very serious politician, even though some people would mock him. Some people admire him, but some people mock him for doing things like, chasing fare dodgers on the tube. So he's deadly serious about this. Two, there is now undergoing a really poisonous row between him and his supporters and the Tories he's just left behind. But in the medium term, I think it's a really big deal. I think it's the biggest defection so far. I think it's the one that matters most for all sorts of reasons. He's not a former. He's still in Parliament. He knows how to operate Parliament. He knows how to grab the mic. He knows how to get attention. And he's a very canny political operator. So I suppose my main big thought after it is this is genuinely a big deal. And although he was sort of caught in the act, which precipitated him getting out there more quickly than he had planned, it's big, he's serious, and it could make a serious difference, but there's all sorts of risks too.
And Joe, we'll talk about the timeline about his departure because you and Laura have found out more things about that in the last 24 hours. But Laura, just focusing on kind of on the future, you also asked him about what he's actually going to do in Reform. Yeah,
so he said he hasn't been promised a job. I think we can imagine that he will hope to get something very prominent. That might be where some of the problems come, right? Because Reform, like any political party, is full of big characters. It's full of people who are ambitious. Robert Jenrick has more experience than most of his new colleagues. He's been in the shadow cabinet until yesterday. So he's going to be after something big. Maybe that would be a wannabe Reform Chancellor. Maybe it would be a wannabe Reform Home Secretary. But he said he hasn't been promised anything. I think also, and you could see from in that interview, we asked him what he thought of Reform policy on lifting the child benefit cap, allowing British families with more than 2 kids to claim more benefits. That's not the Tory policy. And when I asked him about that, he sort of said, the party needs to think it through. Now, one of the reasons Robert Jenrick left the Tory party was he felt restricted and he didn't want to take what he thought was too safe a party line. How's he going to feel in Reform UK if he's not allowed to speak out? So I think there are all sorts of potential risks down the track. Politics right now is very combustible. He's a very strong character. He's deadly serious about his own ambition. Although there's an interesting moment in the interview when he said, this isn't about personal ambition for me. It's about my ambition for the country. How many politicians do we know where personal ambition is not a factor? Think on that. But I think he's really thought about this. There's no doubt in my mind, having talked to him for about half an hour, he has really thought about this. His fundamental analysis, and newscasters will make their own judgment, is basically the Tories right now are not willing enough to say, you know what, the country's in such a pickle, much of it was our fault, and we have to talk about things in a very different, radical way. That's his fundamental analysis. So I think it's more than him just thinking, Reform are doing well in the polls, so I'll just jump. It's more than that. But it is, as ever, there's lots of risk here, but there's also lots of potential reward.
And Laura, I know you've got to dash off and do another interview in a second, but just one last thing. This phrase that's doing the rounds today, partly from Robert Jenrick, unite the right. Just unpack that, what that actually means.
Well, look, there's a kind of death grudge match going on, right, between the Tories, who are trying to survive, and Reform, who are trying to prepare for government. They're trying to persuade the country that they are really, really up for it. If those two parties keep fighting each other, they will, by the simple, big mathematical realities of our politics, they will split the vote on the right. And therefore, the logic goes, that means it's more likely that Labour will manage to keep power when we get eventually to the next general election. If either reform can kill off the Tories, or as would seem unlikely at the moment, the Tories can kill off reform, well then the uniting the right-wing voters as one big bloc would, the maths would suggest, have enough support to have a decent chance of getting Labour out of power. So for Robert Jenrick to sit there today and say, this is about uniting the right, you think, well, at the moment, it's really not at all, because these two parties, Tory and Reform, are going at each other with Reform in the ascendance. If what he's trying to do, what Nigel Farage says he wants to do, is bring the right of British politics together, well, then you do have one big bloc that would be in a better position to beat the Labour government. A couple of problems with that. One is, look, actually, lots of Reform voters are former Labour voters, and not all Reform policies, would you say, are kind of the right anyway. They want to nationalise steel, for example, and as we've already talked about, they do want to keep on with some welfare payments that the Tories had got rid of. But there's also just this question about Reform. If they're really trying to show themselves to be insurgents and new and radical and fresh and bold, well, of course, having lots of people who used to be in government, who the public recognise from years of Tory failure, they would say, well, that doesn't really help his cause as presenting to the nation Reform as something genuinely new. So there are all sorts of kind of complexities. But yeah, that's what he's talking about, unite the right. But unite the right is a phrase that at the moment doesn't really match the reality of what is happening between Reform and the Conservatives. And there is a just risk that they spend so much time fighting each other rather than fighting the Labour Party, they end up, missing some of the opportunities that are obviously there for them to take.
Laura, lovely to be reunited with you. Can you say who your next interviewee is, or do we have to wait till Sunday morning?
You'll have to wait till I'll tell newscasters tomorrow.
Okay, once it's in the can.
It's either Taylor Swift, the Dalai Lama, or I don't know, who else should we say?
Paddington Bear.
The Paddington. There we go. None of them. None of them.
It's not, none of them.
I was going to do a multiple choice, but no, I thought I was going to do a multiple choice.
Well, I'll be listening. I'll be listening whoever it ends up being. So break a leg. See you soon.
All right. Bye.
Yeah, Joe, what's your take on Unite the Right? Because actually that is a phrase that has been doing the rounds of British politics for a little while now, isn't it? Ever since, I don't know, actually since the rise of UKIP.
Absolutely, and there's no evidence that Kemi Badenoch, especially as polls suggest her position may be slightly improving, wants to take the offer from Robert Jenrick. What I found most fascinating about how Robert Jenrick was in Laura's interview trying to frame his decision was this idea that this move seemingly of treachery was actually about principle. Now that's a tactic often used by defectors. He was saying, this is not about my personal ambition, this is about the good of the country. And talking to his allies, people who work with him, they back that up. But it is also, it's a sort of a bold play, and newscasters, I suppose, will have their views whether this is all about the country and whether there's any personal ambition part of the consideration.
Well, because the big timeline for the Robert Jenrick journey, as we discussed in the previous episode of Newscast, is he started off in 2014 as quite sort of Cameroon, quite signed up to the David Cameron project. Then he was very much a member of kind of the new generation in the sort of post-Cameron, post-Theresa May world. And he wrote that article with Rishi Sunak and Oliver Dowden backing Boris Johnson to be the leader. Then he went into the Home Office as a minister. He'd been the community secretary, hadn't he, before during COVID. Then he went because of the stuff
Richard
about planning and Richard Desmond. Then he went to the Home Office, and then he sensationally resigned from the Home Office because he said that basically he'd been confronted with a system that was broken and that politicians didn't have control over who had come into the country. And then kind of Robert Jenrick version 5.0 was up against Kemi Badenoch in the Tory leadership contest in 2024. And then we get to now. So that I'm just giving newscasters the evidence base so they can reach their own judgment on whether this is the inevitable episode in that journey or whether he's gone in a different direction. Right, scrolling back the last 24 hours, what sort of things have you learned about how this all happened?
I think there were two key moments or two key meetings it's worth being aware of. One was Shadow Cabinet on Wednesday afternoon, evening. That is held in the Shadow Cabinet room in the centre of Parliament, very close to where the Speaker lives, in this grand room with a very long baize table. It's where Thatcher's shadow cabinet were. It's where Cameron and Ned Miliband and Jeremy Corbyn, all sorts of people, Neil Kinnock, have been. And Robert Jenrick was sitting there on Wednesday afternoon looking, I'm told, pretty chipper, contributing to discussions about foreign policy. But as that wrapped up at about 5 p.m, Kemi Badenoch was taken aside by her aides and shown the details of this defection speech, this leak from the heart of Robert Jenrick's office, in particular the details of the attacks he was going to make about particular people in the shadow cabinet, Priti Patel and Mel Stride. And then Kemi Badenoch moved to her offices, the leader of the opposition's offices, Lotto as it's known in Parliament, on the periphery of the parliamentary estate.
This is a great geography lesson. Human Google Maps.
Huddling with about 8 people, including her chief whip, including the party chair and various advisors, trying to work out what to do next. And of course, there was one option which is often chosen in politics, which is to wait, to toss something into the long grass, give it a day or so. The big unknown, though, was if Robert Jenrick, seemingly from this leak, was going to move, when could it be? As soon as the next day, when they knew there was a Reform news conference in London. That was actually supposed to be about local elections being delayed. And Kemi Badenoch, I'm told, decided there she needed to act and act fast. And the important background is that for a very long time, for more than a year, almost since she'd taken over as leader, they had been, her team, on high alert for Robert Jenrick either mounting some form of leadership campaign and being on manoeuvres, either being on some form of leadership campaign manoeuvres or planning to defect. And they'd been picking up signs, including one meeting, a dinner with Nigel Farage in December, that things were moving. They didn't, of course, realise what we now know from Farage, that over a number of months, back to September, there were multiple one-to-one meetings. Kemi Badenoch, so she made that decision on Wednesday night, got up incredibly early, pre-dawn on Thursday morning, so she could record that video at home.
Which you can kind of tell because it's got one of those blurred out Zoom backgrounds so that you can't really see where she is, which makes me always think that they're doing it at home.
And it was grainy. It wasn't high quality. And also, I mean, my sense of the lighting was it looked like it was at night. This was definitely pre-dawn. Her team won't tell me what time her alarm was set to get downstairs to record it, but she had a flight at about 8 o'clock to go to Scotland to do some campaigning. So it was really, really early. And we know for an 8 a.m. flight, you're getting up pretty early. You're getting up very, very early. And she, then sort of a key part of the communications and press plan around this big move was done. But it was later that day, around 11 o'clock, that Rebecca Harris, the chief whip, phoned up Robert Jenrick. He denied planning to defect. The call ended abruptly. And very soon after, the button was pressed on the account, on the Twitter account, on the X account, and the video came out. So one key meeting was this shadow cabinet on Wednesday evening, but there was another meeting, which Robert Jenrick actually referenced in his defection speech, which was this away day at a venue overlooking the Tower of London, a place, of course, that traitors ironically spent time hundreds of years ago. And that is where I'm told Robert Jenrick was withdrawn, with his chair back from the table, but also taking copious notes. I'm not sure how you can do both, but maybe he...
Very long arms.
Yeah, maybe. And seeming, I'm told, withdrawn, disengaged. And also he and his team talk about this key moment, this discussion around whether Britain was broken. There being disagreements between the shadow cabinet, whether Britain was broken or not, and some agreeing with Robert Jenrick that Britain, in their eyes, was broken, but the Conservatives couldn't say it because of their role in breaking in it. As for Robert Jenrick's team, their argument, which I think fits with the fact this speech was all written, is that he had made up his mind, and unfortunately there was somebody who had access to his office who spotted this document.
And now
pass
there's
it on.
great speculation about whether the person who had access to his office was actually some kind of mole. This is getting so dramatic now. Who had been put there by Kemi Badenoch's team to keep an eye on him, and we just don't know actually the mechanics of who did what when.
And both sides, Team Badenoch and Team Genrich, seem to not want to go into the details of that. I think presumably to protect whoever it is, presumably because it's a staffer who's not in the public eye, maybe quite young. I don't know who it is, but they've made probably quite a difficult decision. It's not clear if this is a long-term operation or one particular leak, but that was decisive because it was so clear. After that, Robert Jenrick had a brief call with Nigel Farage as he left Scotland. And I'm told the contents of that conversation were, let's do it, it's on, let's do it today. And then he turned up a little bit late for the news conference.
And Patrick Maguire in the Times, often in Newscast as a pundit, has got a great column because he spent the day with Nigel Farage yesterday, just presumably for like some profile he was doing or just to be a good journalist. And yeah, Farage apparently is in his plane having a glass of champagne in the afternoon on his way to London. So is that because he usually has a tipple of champagne at about 3 when he's travelling, or is it because he was celebrating the coup of getting Robert Jenrick? We do not know.
I think he was celebrating the coup. It hadn't worked out as Robert Jenrick wanted. Yes, Kemi Badenoch did. She was decisive. She had some control here, but ultimately, by the end of yesterday, by the time that newspaper deadlines were happening, by the time people were getting into their cars and turning on the radio or turning on BBC One at 6 o'clock, the top line wasn't Kemi Badenoch sacked Robert Jenrick. It's that he's moved, and it is a massive defection. And all the MPs I'm speaking to in the Tory party are discussing who they think might be next.
And are you picking up any ideas of who might be next and how many of them there might be? It's an impossible question to answer. So
it's difficult because people obviously deny it. But then, I asked one shadow cabinet minister yesterday this question, and I posited the name Suella Braverman,
who was name-checked in Robert Jenrick's speech yesterday when he made the leap.
And has been in the past a leadership contender, has not completely dissimilar views to him on immigration. Of course, she was Home Secretary. And this shadow cabinet minister, who's very close to Kemi Badenoch, said, well, it wouldn't be a surprise, would it? Which I thought was an interesting way to tackle that question, because surely you want to bring everyone into the big tent. You argue...
Well, you say that, but Kemi Badenoch's line today is if there's more of you who want to go, just go. And she actually thanked Nigel Farage for doing her spring cleaning for her.
I think there is, if you speak to people close to Kemi Badenoch, I think they realise that this has not just fast-forwarded, sped up, short-circuited a defection. It's also removed a major leadership contender. But also there has been this massive anxiety amongst her team and people who are loyal to her for such a long time about Robert Jenrick. During the party conference, they were worried that he would stage some big event. He would act like Boris Johnson did in Theresa May's time when he was not in government, he was not Prime Minister, and distract and
he didn't. And we now know that while he wasn't, he was also having conversations with Reform UK, because the conversations with Reform started in September and Tory party conference was in October.
Robert Jenrick was having conversations, not Boris Johnson.
Did I say Boris Johnson?
No, you didn't. No. But just in case newscasters misinterpreted. Yeah, exactly.
Although some people would love it if Boris Johnson went to Reform. And actually lots of Boris Johnson's acolytes are there as well.
Oh, yeah. I mean, Nadine Dorries being one of the most prominent ones. And you touch on that key, amazing part of the sort of timeline here, Adam, which is that at the moment Kemi Badenoch's team were so worried about Robert Jenrick springing some surprise at this key event for her, a party conference, which actually they argue was a sort of turning point in strengthening her leadership. Actually, he'd already been reaching out to Reform people a month before. And that decision, even though it hadn't been made, I mean, the journey had definitely begun.
And in terms of what comes next, obviously Laura's interview with Robert Jenrick is out there. We'll see who pops up over the weekend. Does Kemi Badenoch do a big interview? But everyone is waiting for Tuesday now, because Nigel Farage has hinted very heavily. In fact, he just said he didn't even hint it. There's going to be a Labour defection unveiled on Tuesday.
And who do you think it's going to be? I mean, he didn't say it's going to be an MP.
I'll be the last person to know.
I mean, is it an MP? Is it a former MP? Because most of his defections are former Conservative MPs, so it might not be somebody at the heart of politics. I'm not sure it'll be somebody of the seniority and profile of Robert Jenrick. Is it someone in the House of Lords, a prominent left-wing commentator, perhaps?
But I suppose it's a double-edged sword now for Farage because A, that the latest defection was huge, and B, he's now trailed it so far in advance. That builds up expectations. And so if it's somebody not great, then it looks less good.
It does, but I suppose building up an expectations is part of the sort of showmanship. I think what him and his team are trying to do, though, and this Labour defection may help them, is try and get away from the idea that they're just picking up disgruntled Conservatives. They don't want to be attacked as they are being by other opposition parties, including Labour, as recruiting various people who Labour argue wrecked the country and ran government departments badly and are responsible for the problems the UK is facing. If you are an insurgent party, it's hard to do that with too many people from the Conservative years. But the argument you get from Farage's team and from Genrich's team is that, if you're saying we're a one-man band and we don't have people to put together a strong cabinet, well, look, we've got in particular Robert Jenrick. And Robert Jenrick's allies say, if you think reform is not serious, well, Robert Jenrick is a very serious person. He will make reform that.
And Joe, just as we were talking there, we got some breaking news on another story that has been big this week, which is the Chief Constable of West Midlands, Craig Guilford, is going to announce his retirement later this afternoon.
I think another maybe example of somebody jumping before they were pushed. Craig Guilford has been under intense pressure, and it's very hard to find anybody in Parliament, apart from one independent MP, who think he should stay. Shabana Mahmood, the Home Secretary, has said she's lost confidence in her. She seems so frustrated by the fact that she doesn't have the power to sack him, that's held by the West Midlands Police and Crime Commissioner, that she wants to change the law to allow Home Secretaries once again to sack senior police officers. I think it wasn't just the decision around this football match and whether Israeli fans could attend it, but also the justification afterwards and the evidence for that, and the fact that this Chief Constable, Craig Guilford, didn't seem to be entirely honest to MPs, really sealed his fate.
And ending where we began with Kemi Badenoch discovering Robert Jenrick was planning to defect, or at least suspecting he was going to. We've had some great suggestions for our Kemi Badenoch detective pun competition. Kate Sparshat suggests Chemi 5.
Very good.
And Joe from Sheffield offers up Kemington Steel. Do you know what that's a reference to, Joe?
No.
Pierce Brosnan played a very suave detective in the 80s and 90s called Remington Steele.
Did he?
Which actually prevented him becoming James Bond when Timothy Dalton got the job. How's that for pub quiz trivia? Right, that's definitely enough newscast. Laura and Paddy will be back with your next helping on Saturday. Bye-bye.